What happens if a CEO disguises themselves as an ordinary person and gets denied service by their own bank because of their appearance? It was drizzling as Elias Monroe approached Branch 4 of Aurum Capital, the bank he had founded 12 years ago. He wore a worn silver-grey coat, thin framed glasses slipping down his nose, and carried an old leather backpack that had accompanied him through his early startup days. No one in the spacious waiting area recognized him, exactly as Elias intended. A silent investigation, no name tags, no titles, no welcoming applause. But he didn't expect the first test to come so soon and so clearly. "Excuse me, sir. Could you please wait outside? This area is reserved for customers with appointments." The receptionist's voice was not loud, yet its tone was a cold lap. No questions, no explanations, no hint of doubt that the person standing before her might be anyone other than someone not qualified to enter. Elias stood still, one hand resting lightly on his backpack strap. No anger, just observation. At that moment, a young man in a blue suit entered through the same door. "Hello, Mr. Chambers. The elevator is ready for you." The receptionist's tone immediately brightened, as if a switch had been flipped. Elias didn't move. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket, opened to the first blank page, and wrote a single line: "Denied service based on appearance." No underlining, no quotation marks, no resentment. Because this was not the first time he had witnessed this. It was the 23rd. But it was the first time it happened to him. Elias did not enter under his real name. The name on the guest list, in the confirmation email, in the ID card hidden in his wallet, was Jonas Hale, a name ordinary enough for no one to stop him, an identity with no distinction, no status, no power. And that was why he received what ordinary people often endure. And that was why he knew this investigation had started at the right time. Elias did not leave. He didn't need an appointment. No waiting chair. No priority service. He only needed one thing: the truth. And today, he had the first piece of the big picture that the entire system was trying to hide. No disguise, no hidden cameras. Just a man who had passed 50, wearing a plain grey shirt, unpressed dress pants, worn leather shoes, and reading glasses bought at a pharmacy. Elias Monroe left the 39th floor office, not in a driver's car, but with a regular train ticket and carry-on luggage. For 2 weeks after that rainy morning, he became someone else. Jonas Hale, a retired high school teacher, researching how to protect his retirement savings. No privileges, no escorts, no advance emails. At each branch, he entered like any other customer, sat waiting without being called, smiled when directed to the ATM, and nodded when told to try again another day. He didn't record, question, or react. Instead, he wrote neat lines stretched across a thin leather notebook. Young customer with expensive watch, invited to private room. Elderly casually dressed, denied financial assistance. Receptionist changes tone upon seeing a tie. No shouting, no insults, no outright expulsions. But it was that silence that was terrifying. Because discrimination here didn't come from policy, but from eyes, posture, and tone. a kind of bias no one dared to name, yet everyone learned to execute. At a branch near Milwaukee, he asked about opening a retirement savings account. The clerk glanced at his worn shoes and said, "All information is on the website." No smile, no offer to sit. That same day, he saw a young woman in office attire being served water, offered coffee, and the manager was summoned immediately. No words needed. Elias understood. The issue wasn't in the HR manual. It was in unconscious choices repeated daily. And the cruelest truth? He had designed that system, empowered those people, and now they were using it to exclude anyone who didn't look the way they expected. Elias didn't stop. The list of branches to visit next was marked. He needed to know how far this had spread, and who had allowed it to persist all these years under the Orem name he once proudly built. On the 8th day of his quiet journey, Elias arrived at a suburban branch in Indianapolis. This time, he decided to try something different. Still wearing his light gray shirt, now buttoned carefully, his posture straighter as he entered the lobby, and when speaking to the receptionist, he kept his gaze steady, his voice slow but confident. Nothing about him had changed in essence, but the reaction from the other side was different. The receptionist smiled, nodded, invited him to take a seat in the waiting area, and soon after, a financial advisor approached, holding a portfolio. No coffee, no private room, but enough courtesy for Elias to realize one thing. Sometimes, it's not wealth, but confidence that earns people better treatment. The problem is, not everyone can perform that confidence every day, just to receive basic respect. Right after that meeting, Elias returned to his hotel, opened his notebook, and wrote, "Confidence improves response, but cannot erase the divide." The next day, he returned to his old role, walking slower, eyes downcast, voice softer, and every door promptly closed to him. At a branch in St. Louis, he witnessed an elderly man with gray hair wearing a thin jacket, asking about retirement advice. Flatly turned away with, "We're short-staffed today, sir. Please try again next week." But just 10 minutes later, a young man in a white shirt and polished shoes walked in, asked the same question, and was immediately welcomed. Elias didn't need to ask further. No recordings, no hidden cameras. What he needed was clear in the eyes of the attendant. No one shouted at him, but they were silently telling him, "You don't look like the people we serve." In that silence, he began to understand why so many people leave banks not because of interest rates, but because of feeling disregarded. Worse still, many have become so used to that feeling that they no longer see it as something to complain about. It's that very acceptance that sent chills down Elias's spine. The afternoon at the Aurora branch drifted slowly like a gentle autumn breeze slipping through the tall glass windows. Elias sat on the long bench by the window, holding a worn leather notebook, his gaze fixed toward the transaction counter, but not truly focused. No customers at that moment caused any commotion. Only the tapping of keyboards and soft background music filled the space, an atmosphere so quiet that invisible people like him could easily be forgotten. When the automatic door opened with a soft click, Elias did not turn around. It wasn't until an elderly man entered, wearing a faded khaki jacket, worn canvas shoes, carrying a canvas bag, and quietly sat down beside him. The man didn't greet him, but, after a few seconds of silence, spoke in a low, steady voice, not angry, but filled with heartfelt sentiment. "I went through the same thing last month." Elias slightly tilted his head, but the man did not look at him. Instead, his eyes focused on the reception desk where, moments ago, an elderly gentleman was denied service simply because he asked the wrong questions. "I came in," the man continued, "to ask about retirement transfers. The guy at the counter didn't bother to look at my name, just pointed to the support desk. But the next week, I came back, wearing a white shirt and tie, and they called me Mr. Mitchell." Elias remained silent, but his eyes lingered on the tight line of the stranger's lips. "Ronald Mitchell," the man said after a moment, extending his hand. Elias nodded gently, shook it, not revealing his real name. Ronald exhaled softly, then pulled out a folded sheet of paper, its blue ink blurred from being folded many times. "Employee names, branch, times, and how they treated me. I don't have time to write a novel, but I know what I saw." Elias looked down at the page. The list was brief but detailed, much like what he had recorded in his notebook. However, these weren't the notes of a CEO. They belonged to a customer who had been silent for too long. "Have you reported this?" Elias asked quietly. "3 times, Ronald replied. "The answer was always the same. Thank you for your feedback." No one called back. No one asked further. Elias nodded gently. They no longer hoped for justice. They had grown used to being ignored. But now he knew he was not alone anymore. Not everyone turns a blind eye. Not everyone bows their head. And the coincidence between these two strangers, in a place seemingly the quietest of all, marked a turning point that no executive could ignore any longer. The night flight from Denver carried Elias back to New York in silence. He chose an aisle seat, clutching a thin leather notebook filled with countless unnamed notes. High above the ground, amid the quiet cabin and the gentle hum of the engines, he finally allowed himself to relax a little, paying no mind to the glances or whispers around him. But that calm lasted less than 20 minutes, until a young woman in an airline uniform boarded, not as crew, but as a passenger like him. She carried an outer jacket embroidered with the Aurum Capital logo, a small detail that made Elias pause. She sat a few rows ahead, her phone constantly lighting up with incoming messages. He didn't intend to glance, but when the screen flashed the name Thomas Reed, his senses immediately heightened. The first message read clearly: "The customer from Denver branch yesterday looks like a teacher, a bit out of place, flagged for alert. Verify ID at the next point." A prompt reply followed. "Understood. Standard procedure." Elias closed his eyes for a few seconds, not out of sleepiness, but to steady his breathing. He was no longer witnessing isolated system errors. What had just appeared confirmed that the entire machine wasn't just running on bias. It was programmed that way. Decisions like flag, verify, and redirect didn't come from inexperienced frontline staff, but from internal policies communicated, enforced, and accepted as part of the workplace culture. Elias opened his notebook, flipped to a fresh page, and wrote slowly. Systemic bias normalized. Each stroke pressed heavily onto the paper, as if engraving the first indictment file. What chilled him most wasn't the message but the woman's expression. Calm, practiced, with no doubt or hesitation. To her, it was just part of the job. But to Elias, it was the moment all suspicion crystallized into truth. A system had been built not to serve all, but to select who was worthy according to an unspoken standard. And now he knew it was time to find the author of that script. The morning at the Midtown Hotel was unremarkable, except for the early light gently filtering through the curtains and the unusual stillness in Elias's mind. He sat down at his desk without turning on the TV or checking his personal phone. Only the company's secure laptop, a private access account, and a single goal: to uncover who wrote the script that programmed hundreds of bank employees to behave like machines. He sent a brief message to Grace, the executive assistant he still trusted. "I need all internal training documents, delegation policies, and regional rollout reports, especially after Orum's merger with Everspan." Less than an hour later, files began appearing page by page. Memos, training forms, system updates, regional workshop content, all written in polished language. Brand experience orientation, frontline optimization, boosting productivity through customer tiering. Elias read each line as if decoding a hidden code. There was no mention of appearance, race, or voice. But amid the smooth words, he saw one undeniable truth. The system was training employees to identify who the ideal customers were and who were not. Color-coded charts showing service disruption risks, processes for brand image prioritization, and guidelines on effective communication with suitable customer profiles, all traced back to one source: Thomas Reed, the regional director once praised as the post-merger reform architect, now emerged as the mastermind behind a sophisticated exclusion model, controlling the behavior of hundreds of frontline employees without ever showing his face. Elias scrolled down to the internal reviews. Reed was lauded for revenue growth, reduced transaction times, and hitting flagged target customer goals. Yet there wasn't a single word about fairness, not a mention of dignity. He closed the laptop, gripping the worn notebook open to page 80. 7. The problem was never a system error. The problem was how people were trained to believe that service was a privilege, not a duty. And Elias knew if he didn't stop it now, everything he had built over more than a decade would turn into a shiny, cold, hollow empire. It was time for the scriptwriter to step into the light. That noon, the conference room on the 42nd floor of Orum Capital Headquarters gradually filled. 12 executive members were present, mostly department heads, legal, finance, human resources chiefs, along with 2 members from the board of directors. The table had no juice, no colorful printed documents, nor any presentation screen as usual. Only a black briefcase sat in the middle of the table, and Elias Monroe, dressed sharply in a suit, entered with a serious face. He did not start with greetings, nor explain the reason for the meeting. He simply placed an old notebook on the table and said, "This is not a presentation. This is a dossier." The room immediately fell silent. Elias opened the notebook, flipped through each page, reading every line: dates, times, branches, ways customers were rejected for not fitting the brand image. Everyone thought this was an objective report until he quietly said, "I am the one who was rejected in Denver. I am the one who was re-checked in Austin." And I am the one who was disregarded in Atlanta, not as a CEO, but as an ordinary person. A marketing director lightly touched his tie, frowning. This story feels a bit emotional. Elias looked up straight. Then explain why the executive of this very bank was asked for verification 4 times in 8 days. No one answered. He continued, this time placing printed documents on the table. Internal policies, training guides, flagged customer reports, all pointing to the same name. Thomas Reed. This is not a mistake. This is a system, and its designer must be held accountable. He didn't raise his voice, but each word hit the table like a hammer. Elias proposed suspending 17 employees who arbitrarily flagged customers, temporarily halting 5 direct managers, and dismantling the entire appearance-based tiering system. Some opposed, citing operational costs and impact on KPIs. Elias did not waver. Our silence could cost much more, especially if it becomes tomorrow's headline. The vote took place. 10 in favor, 2 abstained. Elias nodded quietly. No joy, no relief, only determination. That afternoon, he met Thomas Reed in a private meeting room. Reed entered, folder in hand, wearing a confident smile. I thought this was a strategy update. Elias said nothing, just pushed a stack of documents towards him. System logs, message contents, flagging orders, policies signed by Reed himself. You didn't write these words by hand, Elias said, but your fingerprints are on every line. Thomas stood silent, then tried to justify. You don't understand what performance means. Elias looked up, eyes steady. No, I understand perfectly, and I know you use power to draw lines, not to serve. Thomas was escorted out of the building the same day. No drums, no trumpets, no farewell words. Only a room left where old rules had just been broken. The next morning, precisely at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, every Orem branch, from major cities to suburbs, lit up with the same screen. No theme music, no intro, no animated logo. Only Elias Monroe, dressed in a dark suit with sleeves rolled up, standing alone in front of the camera. He didn't read from a script or use a teleprompter. He began with a story no one expected. When I was 19, I was stranded overnight at an airport. No ticket, no money, no one to help. An employee looked at my backpack and said, "Figure it out yourself." And I promised if one day I could create something, I would never let anyone feel the way I did. He paused for a few seconds, then continued. I forgot that promise, but now I remember. Elias recounted his 2-week journey, the grey shirt, the dismissive looks, being asked to verify just because he wasn't wearing an expensive watch. He didn't accuse or blame. He spoke calmly and sincerely. No one yelled at me. No one insulted me. But they judged me by the shoes I wore and the way I asked questions. He looked straight into the camera, his voice lowering. From today, 17 employees are suspended. All customer flagging privileges are disabled, and a customer advisory board will be formed, reporting directly to me. It was not an apology. It was a commitment. Every leader at Orem, including myself, will work 2 days a year at frontline branches. No paperwork, no ivory towers. A wave of silence swept across the branches. Elias closed with words no one could forget. You don't need a gold watch to be called by your name. You don't need a suit to be looked at straight in the eye. We have forgotten what service means. But I haven't. And I will not let any of us forget again. The screen went dark. No logo, no slogan. Only silence remained, as if for the first time all employees truly heard the voice of the organization they belonged to. 3 days after the broadcast, Elias neither stayed in the office nor responded to congratulatory emails from the media or the board of directors. Instead, he returned to the small branch in the Queens suburbs, the very place that had once refused an elderly man simply because he asked questions slowly and didn't bring color, printed documents. No cameras, no escorts, no prior announcement. He walked in like any ordinary customer, silent, choosing a spot near the window to observe. Shortly after, another elderly man entered, silver-haired, hands trembling as he held a folded piece of paper, wearing a worn jacket with a crooked button. Elias recognized that posture immediately, the posture of someone all too familiar with rejection. But this time, something unusual happened. The teller behind the counter did not turn away, did not divert her eyes. She stood up, walked around to the front of the desk, bowed slightly to greet the old man, then invited him inside. No special gestures, no flattery, just simple, proper kindness. Elias said nothing. He just sat there, quietly watching and letting his heart settle. A small change, but a difference. Not a revolution, but a sign that what he said that day had not fallen into emptiness. Change does not start with policies or slogans, but with the first pair of eyes that truly listen. When he left the branch, no one recognized the visitor as the CEO. And that was exactly what Elias wanted. A culture that needs no surveillance because the employees have remembered why they chose this work in the first place. In the elevator on his way back, he quietly opened his notebook, the last page still blank. Elias smiled, not because his work was done, but because now he knew what he would write there. 1 week after the broadcast, Elias met with only one person, Richard Lane, who had once sat beside him in the Aurora branch lobby. Without any formalities, Elias placed 2 items on the table, a pair of first-class tickets and an invitation letter to the Customer Advisory Board. Richard looked at him, his eyes still filled with suspicion. "I agree. On one condition, you don't forget that this ever happened." Elias nodded firmly. "I will not forget." That night, alone in his office, Elias opened the leather-bound notebook that had accompanied him throughout his journey. The pages were densely filled with handwriting, each line a snapshot of indifference. He turned to the last page, took up his pen, and wrote, "Respect is not a privilege, it is the foundation." Then he closed the notebook as if closing an old chapter, knowing that tomorrow everything would truly begin again, the right way. Respect is the foundation, not a privilege. If you believe that, please like, subscribe, and comment. True service. Below.